are who we truly are. Life is filled up with hidden things that pull at the strings inside the home that you know. Can't let it go, try to wait just to go, but these feelings cannot be so easily crushed with anxiety. I'll live quietly, this is our life, and I know even though our daily lives are buried in lies, I am here. I couldn't leave you if I tried. I'll stay by your side when your life is hard and gets you down. I'll promise that I'll be around.
You know, there are some days where I just wish I could fit into the general majority of opinions. It would be nice once in a while to not have people threatening me, or generally ripping on me, for my commentaries of over 1 million views, or commentaries on popular talking points. And here it's not gonna get any easier. Steven Universe. We all know it and not all of us love it. I've talked before about good faith and bad faith arguments in regards to Steven Universe, and sometimes they're pretty clear cut, like Lapis being an abuser, definitely made in bad faith. Blaming Rebecca Sugar for all the problems, if not most of the problems of the show, 100% bad faith. Accusing her of indoctrination and being pro... that? 110% bad faith. Saying that the show was too short and it should have fleshed out more of its characters? Good faith. But at the end of the day, not all of them are as clear-cut or even as intentional as these former examples. Sometimes it's a case of the road to hell being paved with good intentions. It is legitimately reasonable as to why these people come to these conclusions. Sometimes. After all, even though Steven Universe is the pinnacle of fiction, it doesn't hit gold every single time. No, that'd be ridiculous. And one of the biggest instances of the show not hitting gold for many people was here, with the episode Bismuth, often referred to as Bis-course, as this is where a lot of people left the show. Now, was it for a good reason? Was it for a bad reason? Let's find out together. I'll be honest, I was gonna wait a little bit before making this video, but history happens to repeat itself quite often, so here we are today making this. So how will this video be structured? While a lot of it is focused on two characters, it also doesn't really seem appropriate to go through this with a Lapis strategy of going through every single moment of character development, because one of them is shown up for a total of 5 episodes in the show, with 4 of them being in the final season, way after where the conflict started, and the other one is the titular character, which would involve going through basically the entire show, which I don't really want to do in an episode by episode format. I will cover it later since it's important, but only in a summary setting. So I decided on this, a flowchart of complaints and arguments, so that we can address them as they come up, as well as any follow-up questions that come from that in a commentary style, like how I did with M-Clement or Easy Peasy. This helps as these videos go into not only the episode itself, but what it means involving the rest of the show. It'll also help in stopping me from repeating myself over and over, because there's gonna be a lot of it. But before we get into what people feel about the episode, or the points they've made, we have to review what the episode is really about. I'll save my opinions about it until after this recap, and I'll save analysis of it until then too, because this isn't like Lapis, in which there are way too many episodes of context. While a lot of the complaints come from various episodes within the show, the main crux of it comes from this episode. Hell, some of them really even come from one scene, like with Lapis. So it's best if we review it before moving on. This episode of Steven Universe starts with the Crystal Gems playing a video game with Steven, rather than doing something like corrupted gem hunting, helping a gem, or so on and so forth. All of a sudden, Lion messes with a shirt that's very important to Steven, and so he decides to go into his main dimension and keep it there. While in there, Steven accidentally pops the bubble of a gem called Bismuth, and while darting around and avoiding her to tell them what she looks like, they finally tell Steven to bring her out, bringing up that they're the only two there, and she doesn't know where she is. She gets brought out and immediately is excited to see Garnet and Pearl, but once they mention Rose, Bismuth looks confused and contemplates it for a bit before asking where she is. Steven then explains that his gem is Rose, but he has no memories of her, and Bismuth immediately brushes it off, talking about how bases are made out of wood now, and asking where everybody is. After asking, she gets sent to the Strawberry Fields, where she immediately panics. She doesn't know what happened in the last 5,000 years, and how these gems are all that's left. The war is over. Keep in mind, bubbling essentially freezes time for gems trapped in it, so to her, she was just there. She's very much upset with how the diamonds has shattered so many, and says that if she was there, she could have stopped it. The gems then bring up that Homeworld still technically has its eyes on the planet, as they keep on trying to fight them. though the gems did wall by themselves by thwarting them. But Bismuth is eager to show Homeworld who's boss, with Steven initially being on board with a delayed yeah. Garnet then interrupts, reminding Bismuth that the gems on Homeworld outnumber them by a lot, and has very much improved technology, but Bismuth shrugs it off again, as she knows that they've both dealt with impossible odds thanks to encouragement. Keep in mind the context that the gems finished the war a few thousand years ago. While they still have to deal with stuff, it's because, well, we'll get to that in a bit. But just remember that the war never ended for Bismuth. We then head to the Forge, where we learn about Bismuth's backstory. Bismuth was originally someone that built stuff for the elites to enjoy, but thanks to Rose Quartz, Bismuth learned that she was in control of her own destiny, and therefore, she made weapons. She does so, giving improvements to the crystal gems, while saying this.
Working on them since before. Well, may as well give them to you now.
Amethyst brings up how suspicious it is that nobody mentioned Bismuth to her, not even Rose, and Steven keeps that in the back of his mind while Amethyst enjoys her new weapon improvements. We then move to another scene where Bismuth is rallying the gems to fight, and while they enjoy it, Steven thinks it's a little too intense and opts for less violent activities, like making pizzas and playing games. We then get a scene of Steven, Bismuth, and the Crystal Gems watching a movie. The protagonist, Lonely Blade, gets an ancient demon blade that grants him infinite power. Bismuth questions why he doesn't use it if it gives him ultimate power, with the eventual result, as shown by the movie, being his corruption. In any case, Steven sets up a place for Bismuth to sleep, and Bismuth decides to give it a go, since she loves these new rituals. Then, Bismuth has a heart-to-heart with Steven, bringing up how it takes forever for him to be friends with a new gem, ending it by telling Bismuth that he's glad she's here, with Bismuth saying that she's glad that she got another chance. Steven is asked to show his stuff, to which he shows off Rose's sword, a weapon made to cut through a physical form without damaging the gem. Bismuth talks about how Rose Quartz changed her life, how she was stuck in the same routine for so long, until she noticed her, a gem different from everyone else, because she decided who to be, and gave Bismuth a chance to choose on her own what she wanted to be, opening her eyes. Steven sees this less favorably though, as he feels as if he can never measure up to the greatness of Rose, to which Bismuth reassures him that he doesn't have to, since he's Steven. Then being brought back to the Forge, Bismuth shows off the Breaking Point, a weapon that will instantly shatter a gem. Steven gets pressured by Bismuth into using the weapon, but even in a fake scenario, Steven is emotionally distraught with this, and refuses to use it. Bismuth then gets suspicious immediately, and Steven says,
Shattering gems. Wouldn't that make us the same as Homeworld?
to which Bismuth disagrees, saying that they would be shattered for the sake of their cause, including protecting friends and family and saving the gems from the tyranny of Homeworld. Steven agrees that while it might be true, it's not what a crystal gem would do. Then Bismuth confronts him, saying that she's more of a crystal gem than anyone, and she'd be happy to take it off Steven's hands, to which Steven refuses, and asserts that it's not right. They stare down at each other for a second, and Bismuth says,
That's exactly what she said.
From this point on, Bismuth believes that Steven is Rose, and tries to kill him, and Steven tries to defend himself. While fighting, there's a few things that Bismuth says that I really want to give attention to, saying that Rose lied about what happened to Bismuth, Rose was similarly offered the Breaking Point, to which Rose refused, and after that, Bismuth also fought against Rose Quartz. In Bismuth's mind, the Breaking Point was the best way to win the war. She says,
How could you value the gems of our enemies more than our own?
She claims that the gems have lost the war without the Breaking Point, and then finishes her fighting by saying how she would have shattered the diamonds and liberated everyone. Steven escapes and tries to talk with Bismuth. He says that it has to stop, and then Bismuth immediately suggests that Steven kill her. Then Steven says,
Even if we don't agree, nobody deserves this.
Bismuth doesn't see it this way, and tries to kill him again, to which Steven is forced to defend himself again, with Rose's sword, something shocking both of them. Then, the battle is over, and while staying in her physical form, Bismuth airs out her grievances. She talks about how she sees the situation, that she was valued so little to Rose in the long run, that she didn't even tell the crystal gems, to which Steven replies,
I'm going to tell them. I'm gonna tell them everything.
and after all that, Bismuth admits,
Then you really are better than her.
before Steven tells the gems about her, and then she gets put away with the rest of the bubble gems. Before I went into research about this video, and had just some general knowledge on my side, there were a few problems I had about this scene. Sure, some of it got cleared up, but not all of it. First and foremost, Bismuth deserved more time to be fleshed out. That's an unavoidable statement. The episode itself did a lot to flesh her out, but in my opinion, it definitely should have been spread out through more episodes, like with Peridot's arc, Lapis's arcs, and hell, even the arcs of the Crystal Gems. To its credit, the titular episode does work a lot better given this context, and it would be the most gripping possible way to have this tension work out. It doesn't change the fact that Bismuth did indeed deserve more time. Second off, Steven's wording is a bit wonky. One part that always gets to everyone is the line "Shattering gems makes us as bad as Homeworld," because to many, it felt like he forgot about the force fusions, the cluster, and the corruption wave of the diamonds when talking about how they're the same. While I disagree with this notion, I'll get to why through the videos we have to cover, because we have more than a few of them to get through and none of them are gonna be easy. Now, while I did say that we had 5 to cover, I'll be honest and say that I'll only cover Lily's videos briefly. You know why? Because a typical Lily Orchard video goes through so much stuff that it's hard to keep track of. The only reason I could really do it with Lapis is because it was basically just a 1-minute clip in which she exclusively focuses on one topic, clearly labeled and everything. A typical glass of water video doesn't have that distinction, and Lily will seemingly go from one point to another even if it's only tangentially related, or brought up for a split second and then abandoned. For instance,
the theme they're very obviously going for here is twofold. The first is that violence are bad, which is neither a compelling or philosophically correct message.
this is a recurring talking point that Lily brings up in a lot of her videos, including a very infamous one with Josh Scorcher that I refuse to get into. A lot of videos have covered it, and I want to keep this only to Bismuth. This also means that I'm not covering this video in full. I refuse to do so for this reason. So I won't do a point-by-point debunk for this one, and only briefly cover the few things that matter in this part that I wanted to point out. Which also means that we won't take too long in this video because she only really briefly mentions stuff about the episode.
It is the exact opposite of controversial to suggest that it would in fact be a great idea to shatter the diamonds and fashion their shards into jewelry. And to suggest that destroying the diamonds would make the crystal gems just as bad as them is so mind-bogglingly stupid that anyone who does suggest it ought to be checked for debilitating brain damage.
While she expounds on this throughout the video, I feel like I need to nip this in the bud here for this point. You see, Lily, and by extension a lot of people, believe that this is where the narrative of how to deal with the diamonds started and ended. That this is where Steven Universe dropped the ball, by suggesting that non-violence was the key to deal with the diamonds, and not shattering them. I said it okay-ish in my easy peasy video, but to restate it better, a conclusion with what to do with the diamonds was not reached in this episode. The statement that killing a Nazi makes you as bad as a Nazi was not reached in this episode. What actually happened in the episode started out as an initial clash of perspectives, neither of which were 100% wrong, before delving into Steven fighting for his life and Bismuth not talking to Steven, but instead Rose. From the perspective of Bismuth, the diamond shattered so many of her allies, friends, and comrades that she made throughout the Gem War that settling the score seemed like the most reasonable answer to her. In her words, Homeworld hasn't been playing fair. This trauma can hit really deep, especially for someone who's fresh out of the war, making her very much vengeful. This does seem justified from her end, but it ends up being wrong in multiple ways that we'll get to in the next points. Speaking of, there's also the perspective of Steven. Up to this point, Steven's naive kindness and positivity has worked to turn enemies into friends most of the time, the only exceptions being Jasper and Kevin. He was able to help out so many gems, including ones loyal to Homeworld's demands. He helped Peridot discover the concept of change, and taught her how Homeworld's philosophy was wrong. He helped Lapis deal with her trauma to the point where she decided to stay on Earth and forget dealing with the diamonds. He helped Centipedal calm down by reuniting her with the rest of her troop. He helped the Cluster calm down by giving them the help that they needed to bond together and deal with their trauma as a collective. Through all of these, he learns that not every scenario is as simple as they seem on the surface, and while maintaining a naive optimism, he learns that it's not always easy, or that it always works the best. From the perspective of Steven, Homeworld gems will be robbed of the ability to decide for themselves who they want to be, the same way Bismuth was given a chance. We'll get more to why this isn't 100% right in a later point, but I want to set it up here, because they don't get too far into the conversation before the conversation itself diverts. After Steven refuses to take the breaking point and says it's not right, Bismuth is completely convinced that it's not Steven, it's Rose Quartz. The rest of this scene, until the very end, is Bismuth talking to Rose, the one that bubbled her away and never told anyone, and Steven running for his life from another gem like Jasper, who sees Steven as Rose and tries to kill him. Even the ending, when Steven says that nobody deserves to be shattered even if they disagree, we have to keep in mind that Steven comes from a place of trying to befriend Bismuth and try to understand her struggles, one that has consistently known that his kindness works, and that sees Bismuth as an ally. Bismuth, on the other hand, sees this as just a platitude of someone who doesn't care about her fellow gems, one that has sat on the sidelines as her troops were killed left and right, and one that is completely out of her mind while still preaching this peace after witnessing the death of so many of her allies. Both of these are completely justified given where they each came from. Treating this as a genuine conversation where Steven wins in the end is absolute malarkey. This is especially true since no conclusion was ever made or expressed morally as the right thing to do, as after the rose quartz part, they weren't conversing with one another. Stephen was trying to escape from dying, and Bismuth is holding Rose accountable for her actions.
It also undermines itself again. Stephen only stops Bismuth by getting a drop on her and managing to destabilize her form and put her gem back in its bubble. Stephen has to resort to violence because he can't actually convince Bismuth that she's wrong. Because she isn't wrong.
It's not about convincing Bismuth that she's wrong about using the breaking point. It's about convincing Bismuth that she's wrong about seeing Stephen as rose quartz, because Bismuth is trying to kill Stephen for that exact reason.
If anything, recent episodes have shown just how right she was. Not only was Rose forced to shatter Pink Diamond in order to get anything close to freedom for the crystal gems, very recently it was shown that the diamonds are on their way to Earth to cause all kinds of trouble.
I want you all to keep this in mind for a bit.
This is where we get to the troubling part of what Tumblr likes to call Bis-course. Bismuth's whole idea of using the breaking point would be to shatter the diamonds, who she calls the homeworld elites, or the upper crusts. Probably the agates as well, as they're little more than taskmasters right down to wielding whips. Doing so would remove the gems, keeping every other gem oppressed by homeworld, which means that to the don't kill your enemies in a war types, Bismuth was immediately mischaracterized as a bloodthirsty psychopath who wanted to shatter every homeworld gem, despite it being made very clear not one scene ago that she was a homeworld gem until Rose opened her eyes, and as such would obviously assume the other homeworld gems only needed the same awakening once the diamonds were out of power.
Wow, that's a lot of heavy lifting you're doing there by just assuming the exact gems Bismuth is talking about, especially because admittedly the wording is sorta all over the place here too. Bismuth talked about the upper crust and elite once respectively, and they were both used in regards to hyping up the gems to win the fight, but using the icon of a hated image. And in the Forge, Bismuth mentions the diamonds twice, and both of them hyping up what the breaking point, and by extension she, can do for the crystal gems' cause. They also bring up gems in general several times too. Once we're talking about shattering gems, to which Bismuth doesn't correct Stephen when saying that she wouldn't, instead saying that it's for the sake of their cause, and therefore not the same. And then once by Bismuth talking about how Rose values the gems of her enemies rather than her own. The episode also puts a lot of focus on how the shattering of her allies gets to her emotionally, so I believe this is the case. But I see it in a 95-5 way because of the wording. Like, I can see the intent, and the episode does make it super clear, but it can be misconstrued, even if it's doing so in bad faith or just plain ignorance. Not to mention, the rest of these videos do say this with the diamonds exclusively in mind. So how am I going to do this? Simple. I'll address both the claims of either shattering gems in general and shattering the diamonds, aka the most and least charitable takeaways from this episode. First off, shattering gems. There's the question of determining which gems are worthy. After all, if you have a weapon that can immediately kill anyone, responsibility comes with it. And if Bismuth employed the strategy of kill first, ask questions later, like how she says that she would, it wouldn't be a decision that she could make. To see worthiness like how Rose saw worthiness of Garnet, Pearl, or Bismuth herself, or how Stephen saw worthiness of Peridot and Lapis. Even if it is just the upper crusts, that would involve pearls and sapphires. Next off, shattering the diamonds. Believing that those that aren't in power won't be affected by the losses of diamonds is weird. What about ones like Peridot or Lapis or Nephrite or Jasper, as they all found meaning in the gem dictatorship? Once it's gone, assuming that they weren't learning freedom with the crystal gems, how will they change? But that's a small potatoes argument. What about the shattering of the diamonds? Did Stephen just forget about all the atrocities that the diamonds have done? It sure does seem like the case upon first glance, but with the context of the episode that surrounds it, Stephen is not talking about them on purpose. Throughout the episode, the main conflict that Bismuth is focused on is that of the shattering and disposal of her gem allies. It's what the episode itself focuses on, and what the show talks about. Why does Stephen not talk about it? Well, there are a few reasons, I think. First off, all of those were technically done after the war. Specifically, we learn about when they happened before the episode, with the corruption through Monster Reunion, and the Force Fusion / Cluster in When It Rains. Considering those, he could have pushed it to the back of his mind when talking to Bismuth, who very much has the mindset of that war currently happening, or at least that's what the stress of the war has done to her mental state. Second off, and less technicality based and way more likely, Stephen very much sees these scenarios as potentially fixable. From Ocean Gem, we learned that the motivation to subdue and contain corrupted gems was a way to find them help later. The same goes for when we learn about the shards that the crystal gems get in places like Secret Team and Frybo. Heck, with the cluster, they also try their best to fix it up, either as they plan to do so within Peridot's arc, or after Stephen was able to get into its mind. Up until this point, basically all the situations that Stephen has dealt with were fixable in some way, shape, or form, except shattering, because that, as far as he knows, is 100% permanent, which could be why he focuses on that with Bismuth. It's what the symbol of the crystal gem means to him, as gems who care about gem kind and the state of the world. It's right there in the theme song.
We are the crystal gems, we'll always save the day, and if you think we can
Finally, he could have just not thought about it. There's always the possibility that since Bismuth talked about and or focused on the Shattered Gems, that his mind could have focused on that, and he could have forgotten everything else. Sort of like I said with the first thing, it's an incredibly bad faith reason that involves not looking into the show any further to prove it, and mischaracterizing Steven so hard, but I'll entertain the notion of that for this part of the video alone. It happens. People are forgetful, and while I believe that my first two reasons, specifically the second one, are very much considerable given the context of everything, there is the possibility that Steven was an idiot. But whatever, he forgets something. Sure, it's important, but the benefit of the doubt exists, right? Well...
This, to me, is what is truly disgusting about Bismuth. Homeworld are fascists. There's no getting around that. Bismuth's themes are arguing against stopping fascists. That is a terrible lesson to teach, especially to children.
Ooh boy. We're surprisingly covering a lot of ground with this first video. Let me play this clip from earlier from a bit.
Recent episodes have shown just how right she was. Not only was Rose forced to shatter Pink Diamond in order to get anything close to freedom for the Crystal Gems, very recently it was shown that the Diamonds are on their way to Earth to cause all kinds of trouble.
But yes, this is the main argument that connects all the way back to point 1. The show must be coming to this conclusion, since Steven is the one that says it, and he's the moral center of the show. In actuality, this is the beginning of Steven's main arc in the show. Like I said before, Steven's optimistic naivete starts failing. Like Lily herself says, recent episodes have proven this wrong, and a lot of the show does the same thing. In the beginning, he was able to use this naive optimism to his advantage when dealing with the problems of the Crystal Gems, Peridot, Lapis, Centipedal, the Cluster, and so on and so forth. And even after learning everything that they've been through, still maintains his optimism that he can help them despite these atrocities. A nuanced naivete, if you will. But starting from Bismuth, this gets turned on its head and shows the multiple reasons why it doesn't work anymore. Sometimes the scars that they have are too deep to be handled so simply, and to see eye to eye, like with Bismuth or Lapis in raising the barn. They could have such a grudge against you that their pride makes them refuse to be helped by you, like with Jasper. Sometimes they just can't be helped no matter what you try, like Peridot's depression in Back to the Kindergarten, or in Dewey Wins. Sometimes they'll take advantage of you for their own selfish gain, like with Eyeball or Navy. Sometimes they really want to be in your side, but circumstances beyond their control prevents them from doing so, like with Topaz. But sometimes it involves going against your word to do what you think is right rather than trusting them, like with Connie post-trial. It works sometimes, like with Uncle Andy, but Steven doing with all of this is compiled with the fact that he learns that Rose Quartz shattered Pink Diamond. This revelation destroys the faith he had in what it means to be a crystal gem, and it cuts deep after all the experiences he's had before, and especially dealing with Bismuth, telling her that violence wasn't the answer just a few episodes ago. With the symbol of the crystal gem broken, he doesn't know what to believe anymore, about being a crystal gem in general, and living up to the expectations set by his mom, a consistent goal for him up to this point. It could be seen in most of the episodes before, but a good one was beautifully demonstrated by Zaid Magenta, formerly Misanthropony, in his Felf and Grace video, when he talks about Storm in the Room, and how the image of Steven's mom has changed so dramatically for him.
What makes this episode so important to Steven's character is that it shows how he understands the value of questioning things, wanting a mother that was the summation of everyone's expectations and the reality of who she was based on what she did. Steven is really questioning why Rose had it, moving beyond his naive view of her and looking at it more realistically. It's an episode that really changes how Steven regards his thoughts on himself. It demonstrates how much he really is like the other Crystal Gems since they each carry their own self-doubt. It's about overcoming those feelings, treasuring the family he's been fortunate enough to have, and in time not being someone just like Rose, but someone even better, just like Bismuth said he would.
Speaking of episodes that show this well, both the expectations of Rose Quartz and the naive optimism of Steven are succinctly established in Mindful Education, when we see how much guilt Steven has when poofing Bismuth, not healing Jasper, and shredding Eyeball, all before being given a stern look from his mom, symbolizing the expectations he's failed to live up to, leading him to cry and destabilize. It's also kinda tragic because Lily almost gets it as seen with the next point.
Like it or not, Rebecca Sugar approved of an episode of Steven Universe that told kids that killing a Nazi makes you a Nazi. An idea that is wrong at every conceivable scale of resolution and is only believed by perpetual cowardly fence-sitters, naive children, and actual Nazis trying to game the system in their favor.
Very interesting word choice, Lily. Naive children believe in this, huh? Naive, huh? Now this part of the video was made a while after Bismuth was released, after the few episodes Lily could analyze at the end of Season 3. She now has more material to work with, and so do I. I guess for anyone who doesn't know, Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond the whole time. That's basically all the spoilers you need to know for now. In any case, okay Lily, what have you got for us?
Oh, but the shocking twist is that Rose was one of the people who was benefiting from the oppressive regime the entire time. That's not as shocking as you think it is, Rebecca. Of course Rose was a privileged moron, because only a privileged moron would try to pull that just as bad why can't we all be moderate horse shit.
Nothing new, I guess, but I do want to bring up a section from this Tumblr post that I found interesting, and I just think it's a really neat perspective in contrast to this one, talking about Rose and Bismuth's perspectives, instead of Steven and Bismuth. It was made a day after Bismuth aired.
War is hell. Hard choices have to be made. There isn't always an easy right or wrong. Bismuth is a soldier who couldn't stand seeing her comrades dying and not being allowed to respond in kind. Rose was a soldier who couldn't stand seeing her comrades dying, but knew it wasn't worth becoming like her enemy just to win. Neither of them is right, neither of them is wrong.
I don't know, just thought it'd be neat because we're going to hell really fast.
Allegedly, Sugar planned every story element beforehand, something that I simply do not believe. But if it's true, Sugar let this episode sit here, stinking up the place and leaving a bad taste in everybody's mouths, just so she could have her shocking twist that didn't actually shock anybody.
You know how I always talk about bad faith? Well, I get tired of Lily Orchards. First off, why doesn't she believe that the show was planned? She just doesn't believe it. That's basically it. This ends up combining with the conclusion she made earlier in the video, saying that Rebecca Sugar also controls the airing schedule of Steven Universe, or at least that she sees them in advance and just chooses not to do anything about it. From here, the logic can only flow three ways. 1. This plot point was not planned. 2. This plot point was planned, and she just left it there maliciously. And 3. The plot point was planned, and she just left it there out of not knowing better. Now, we can get rid of 2, because the end of the video states that Lily's stance is that she's not doing this out of malice. But the rest of the conclusions imply that Rebecca Sugar was the one at fault no matter which way you slice it. Which, especially considering the fact that the network decides when this stuff airs and not her, is insulting, plain and simple. Also, it's insulting when it indeed has been planned for that long.
Everyone and their grandmother was tearing this episode apart for the fucked up lol so neutral hack of a theme, and the crew just let it happen.
Fun fact for you all, the production of Steven Universe ended around the time that Bismuth was released. As in, the episodes were finished and handed off to Cartoon Network by then. They would literally have no ability to do anything about it, so complaining about it is a moot point.
Sugar's insistence on giving the audience as little information as possible backfired in the most spectacular way, and was long considered a huge black mark on the series. A lot of people forgave it after the Pink Diamond reveal and Bismuth was unbubbled for the wedding, but it shouldn't have taken this long to get here.
This is also a question that gets asked a lot. I even covered it in my Easy Peasy video about people complaining that Bismuth shouldn't have been bubbled and should have stayed with the rest of the Crystal Gems. A specific example of this is with Blue Order, someone who does reaction videos on YouTube to a few cartoons. Some of you might know him from his Star vs. Fell from Grace video. He also asked this question, and he got a bunch of comments giving him a very reasonable answer as to why this was done. And it's really simple. Bismuth tried to kill Steven. The trauma inflicted on trying to murder Steven would have hit hard, especially to the main Crystal Gems, the one who saw her as an ally through and through, and especially for Steven.
Without the context of the rest of the series, this episode looks so disgustingly racist that you could practically hear Steven yelling, "All lives matter!" and Sugar just let it remain in that state.
Really? Is this where this argument is going? Jeez Louise, this is absolutely pathetic. You have to blatantly ignore context in a story-based show to make this point? Like, on some level, I can understand what you mean in regards to optics, but like I said in the Lapis video, when you disregard the reason as to why it's done, you disregard the nuance in their characters, the nuance in what they're suffering through, and the complexity of this entire conflict, leading to these overly simplified conclusions.
So about halfway through the series, right after Bismuth in fact, we're introduced to the idea that Rose Quartz kicked off the war by shattering Pink Diamond, the leader of Earth's colony at the time. Steven spends a while agonizing about this, and the rest of the gems all just accept it as a reality of war. This is something of a hard-hitting moment for Steven, as he literally just got done telling Bismuth that shattering gems was the worst thing in the world to do, even worse than death, apparently, and now he has to contend with the fact that his mother shattered Pink Diamond. Okay, a piece of information that fundamentally alters the way Steven has to think about his mother and his own narrow view of what's moral. Well done, Sugar, that was very interesting. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not it was a good or bad story thread, with a lot of people pointing out the raging hypocrisy of Bismuth having immediately precluded this, but at the very least it was interesting to see how Stephen would have to deal with that guilt, and in that briefest of glimpses in Mindful Education, it looked like he was at least torn over this.
Wait a second, was that just straight up point 4? So now, thanks to this, we know that the show isn't teaching this, right? Because Steven isn't actually meant to be a projection of the show's morals, because it's just Steven's perspective, right? Therefore, this wouldn't be teaching the message? Well, that's actually really great. Now we can discuss the nuance of everything and come to a better understanding of the conflict presented and...
So, obviously, Pink Diamond vanished, took up the mantle of Rose Quartz, and started her revolution, right? No, that would make sense, but no. That would make Pink Diamond experience a moment of growth and realizing how terrible and regressive her sister's way of governing is, and make her the flawed but sympathetic character Sugar wants her to be, and we can't have that. What actually happened was that Pink Diamond started the war, and pulled the strings on both sides of it like Emperor fucking Palpatine before deciding to fake her own death and live as Rose Quartz forever.
I'm sorry? Spoilers for the prequel trilogy, I guess? Considering the fact that you've seen up to Lex from Here to Homeworld, there's more than a few main differences between Pink and Palpatine, and while I won't go into all of them, there's one main relevant difference. Pink could not convince the Diamonds, as opposed to Palpatine, who succeeded in being the Chancellor of the Republic, and Darth Sidious, the leader of the Siths. While she was given the role as one of the Diamonds, it's clear that she wasn't seen as an equal. Even when she got her own colony, she wasn't allowed to delay the gem harvest no matter what she argued. Even after being genuinely changed by experiencing Earth firsthand and learning that what she did was wrong, in terms of arguing, she could have had false pretenses on it working and changed her mind after being fed up, or could have tried her best to make the only established system she's ever known work for her once, after failing to do so for so long.
Pink Diamond is a character who was born into a privileged, idyllic life, demanded more than she rightfully deserved on the basis that her status demanded it, realized the responsibility was more than she could chew, and decided to bail out on it so she could live a life of relaxation and laziness.
Okay, I think I'm done here. This interpretation of Pink Diamond is made in so much bad faith that I refuse to continue. Plus, she doesn't really speak about Bismuth anymore. Like, honestly, do you know why she took this interpretation of Pink Diamond as uncharitably as she did? Because Pearl told the story, and Pearl was a biased party, which is why she relaxed from her duties as a Diamond by leading a rebellion without the life of luxury that she was exposed to, and consistently going out of her way to defeat threats to the Earth. I'll save it for the Diamond video. In any case, next up is... Huh? What do you mean there's another Lily video? Dear God. Okay. After a while, Lily decided to rewrite the section of her video that talks about Bismuth. From her perspective, she did an okay job, but she wanted to use the video to show the improvement in her critical thinking. Okay, I'm with ya. So what do we got?
The issues reached a head in Bismuth. This is difficult to talk about. Not because it's a complicated issue, mind. It's not. Steven Universe makes the claim that killing a tyrant makes you as bad as them.
Well, that sucks.
It doesn't. That statement is just wrong no matter how you spin it. Objectively, morally, pragmatically, it is wrong. Steven is wrong. Rebecca Sugar is wrong. Anyone who has ever said this in regards to works of fiction and real life is wrong.
And that's the video done. Obviously, there's more to the video that I could cover, but none of it really has to do with Bismuth. And I know I just did a section where I talked about Pink Diamond for a few points, but this video has even less to do with Bismuth than that, because it goes into how this show doesn't work from a progressive standpoint. I'm not kidding. It's all in relation to the civil rights movement and BLM, and it all stems from this misinterpretation of Bismuth. To her credit, I could see her points working when talking about the success of stuff like progressive policies, I guess. I'm not politically literate enough or emotionally ready to delve into this, but assuming that everything that she says about progressive policy is meaningful and well made, this video is the equivalent of trying to find out why a laptop that was dumped into the ocean doesn't work. Like, all the pieces are there, they all fit together and such, but everything was ruined by the fact that it was dumped in the damn ocean. And when you compare Steven Universe to a white nationalist because of this, that's all I could take.
Oh, bite the weenie.
Man, if I had a nickel for how many times JoJo was brought into a Steven Universe rant, I'd have 2 nickels. Which is not that much, but it's weird that it happened twice. Anyway, I gave my 10 cents on who Lily was in the Lapis video, but who is Dire Gentleman? Well, they make videos analyzing stuff, and in this video, he analyzed genocide themes in Wander Over Yonder in Steven Universe. Before I begin though, I want to talk about a few things. First off, I generally don't mind Dire Gentleman's content. Going through the videos that I've seen of his, I like his goofier videos, but stuff like his Review Must Go On and Bill Cypher reviews are pretty good too. His most infamous take was defending the ending of Star Versus, the one where Star kills all of magic, and as somebody watching through it now, I will say that they did a lot of backflips for this one. Cartoon She even covered some of these, but like, I get it. Sometimes you feel strongly about the things you like, and you feel like defending them whenever you can. Heck, I wouldn't be here now without that sort of motivation, but you have to remember to keep your head on straight and see what you have in front of you. Before we go in, there are some minor spoilers for Wander Over Yonder here, and by that I mean it spoils the ending, I guess.
If any problem individual continues to persist beyond their existence becoming known, or if a substantial amount of deviant gems begin to become more uppity, the Diamond Authority resorts to more dramatic means of demonstrating their control, which are almost certainly meant as an example to discourage future insubordination. The easiest and most effective way the Diamond Authority has to silence opposition from those within their own ranks is to mangle the bodies and minds of all dissenters regardless of the severity of their crimes. In the case of a certain rebel army and many of their own loyal forces battling on Earth, the Diamonds chose to end the war by focusing a beam of corrupting light, which transformed all gems on the planet into brainless husks which barely even resembled their true self. The Diamond Authority finds both of these interpretations of fusion to be an affront against nature, and only acknowledges fusion between gems of the same variety for the purpose of utility in completing specific mandated tasks as legitimate. Every other form of fusion must not only be stamped out, but be made into such a perverse mockery of itself that no gem with any sliver of self-preservation would even attempt it. Thus, the Cluster, a living mass grave formed by the shattered pieces of deviant gems and locked in a forcible state of inescapable fusion.
Dire Gentleman sets up this first and foremost, with an explanation of the show, which is fair. Explaining what happens is key to getting your audience to understand something, but he gets a few things wrong, which may or may not be important later. First off, the Diamonds weren't even aware that they could corrupt gems, and only wanted to destroy them. Is it minor? Sure, but making corruption out to be a thing that they regularly do is kinda iffy. Second off, the Cluster was not formed because intergem fusion was wrong or anything like that. It was specifically because of the death of Pink Diamond, which is when Yellow Diamond deemed Earth to not be a suitable place for mass incubating gems, which is why she wanted that planet to die with the Cluster using already dead gems, despite many other ways to utilize its resources, as Peridot pointed out in Message Received.
Bismuth, the episode which introduced the character of the same name as a potential ally for the forces of good, before unceremoniously kicking her into the corner for having some disagreements about how to handle the Diamond Authority.
You know, it occurred to me that a lot of the problems people have with the show come from people thinking that the show is trying to teach these messages, and misunderstanding conflicts. Lavis is an abuser, misunderstood episodes like Alone at Sea, Barnmates, and Racing the Barn. The show is teaching pacifism and immediate redemption for the most evil people, comes from a misunderstanding of episodes like Bismuth and Change Your Mind. And to spoil a future video, Steven's childhood trauma was fixed with a family hug, comes from a misunderstanding of the entirety of Steven Universe future.
Disagreements about how to handle the Diamond Authority. Those disagreements stemming from the fact that Bismuth developed a weapon which could directly shatter a diamond, thus permanently ending their reign of terror. And this is treated by the main character as a step too far to address the aforementioned atrocities. Steven, whom the show explicitly frames as the moral center, believes that using deadly force against the diamonds would make the good guys effectively no different from the bad guys.
You know, this point really bites him in the ass when he brings up Wander Over Yonder, a character who, by the logic of being the main character, and presumably not having a character arc, is framed as the moral center. While I know that Yonder isn't meant to be as serious of a show compared to Steven Universe in terms of storytelling, oh boy, it doesn't stop Dire Gentleman.
Even though it is unmistakably the case that the diamonds go above and beyond mere killing. Using Bismuth's weapon to end one or more of the diamonds in the blink of an eye, as she puts it, wouldn't be cruelty. Compared to the hellish nightmare of having one's own body and mind used as part of a fusion experiment, an instantaneous death is a mercy.
Wait, what? Like, even ignoring Steven's naive perspective, seeing it as cruel no matter what, this is a weird point? Just because someone does something more cruel to a bunch of people doesn't make the first thing any less cruel. If you starve your kid for 6 hours because you wanted them to figure out how to open up a can of beans and eat it, and your neighbor does the same thing but for an entire orphanage, your neighbor is definitely worse, but you're still cruel.
On the basis of magnitude alone, it would be unreasonable to frame both sides of this war as equally violent. This is without even taking into account the actual values of each side, which are again the Diamond Authority choosing to commit genocide on every living being that does not fit into their socially constructed hierarchy, and the rebellion simply trying not to get killed. Now granted, there is another aspect of this discussion that I glossed over, which is that most Steven Universe fights operate on Weenie Hut Jr. rules, where all forms of lethal harm actually do nothing but put characters to sleep until they throw on a new pair of pants. I'm choosing to ignore that because it's not really relevant, and further muddles the show's intended message.
We'll get to the ignoring blank because it's muddling the message point in a bit, because oh boy do I have some stuff to say about that, but I want to tackle this Weenie Hut Jr. logic first. Making your enemies faint rather than die is surprisingly relevant to the show, especially in regards to bubbling them. As explained in Ocean Gem, the goal of the Crystal Gems is to bubble corrupted gems so that they can find a solution to their corruption in the near future, and by keeping them in stasis through bubbling, they make sure that they prevent harm to others. This last part is what was initially done for Peridot, a gem consistently trying to enable nefarious plans, and Bismuth by Rose Quartz due to, well, you know. As explained in Historical Friction and Buddy's books, they've been doing this for thousands of years. It's very much important to the show, and the core values of what makes a crystal gem, at least to the current crew, specifically Steven at the time of Bismuth.
Steven Universe appears to be going for a direct allegory to modern politics, but 9 times out of 10, the fantastic elements of the text don't support any semblance of comparison to contemporary real-world conflicts.
This conclusion has no merit. Like, if by your own admission it doesn't work 9 out of 10 times, then maybe you came to the wrong conclusion? I think it's because they mentioned a genocide or a war within the show itself, and I think that's the case because he immediately brings up a real-world genocide to show how irresponsible it is to teach this message. But that's like saying that the entirety of Adventure Time is based on how bad nuclear warfare is, just because it had a nuke go off. This feels like a repackaged version of Fusion equals Sex. Think about it. There's a bad faith interpretation of Steven Universe that's taken too literally out of nowhere based on a loose interpretation or tenuous examples, and despite the fact that there are way more examples disproving than actually proving that, it gets taken as a popular opinion and gets spread around. First off, the show, in terms of genocide, is something that we need to talk about. Like, I watched his follow-up video to see what kind of genocide he was talking about and who it was against, and I may also have to visit that in my Diamond video because, it's something. Because the show is very much anti-genocide. You know how I know? That's literally the reason why Rose Quartz went to battle, and the reason why the crystal gems exist. In the words of Greg, she saw that they were doing something awful to the planet, and Rose couldn't stand it, so she fought to protect the Earth. She led a war to defend the Earth, and even thousands of years later, she and the crystal gems defended Earth, and still do so up until the end of the series. Heck, even Steven holds the same resolve as we see in Familiar. But in the context of Bismuth, it's about the shattering of gems in a war that the episode, and by extension Bismuth and Steven, focus on. Not only is this where the explanation of the origin of the cluster and corruption bite him in the ass, but, war isn't inherently genocide. Hell, even if we were talking about the fact that the diamonds regularly shatter gems that don't fit into the idea of perfection, then the show is also anti-genocide on that front, as Steven regularly defends gems like these, and even in Bismuth itself, still believes that nobody deserves to be shattered. Second off, the show and its themes are not specifically about the gem war, rather the effects of it in terms of trauma, and learning how to heal or be loved despite that. Compare this to something like Avatar. In Avatar, the war is consistently going on. Even if you don't get told explicitly about the war, it's so intertwined into the world and the characters and the stories that it only makes sense that Avatar regularly explores these themes and talks about them. A majority of episodes in Steven Universe don't cover the specifics of the gem war or genocide of the diamonds, or have them hopping from planet to planet to save places, because the effects have never truly ended from the war on Earth, even after thousands of years. And more to the point, it's not what the focus of the story is about. It focuses on the effects that said gem war had on all these characters. Pearl's self-worth stems from what she did for Rose during the war, devaluing herself for her sake. Amethyst's issues come from not living up to what an amethyst should be, and the fact that she was seen as lesser by the gems for being made from the result of the war, at least in her perspective. Garnet's triumphs come from still standing and fighting while people try to devalue her every time she fights Homeworld. She's trying to preserve her own way of life. Labus has to deal with being kept a prisoner in the mirror, as well as her PTSD from it. Peridot's entire philosophy changes because she learns about the Earth and how her original culture is wrong, as opposed to what she learned, causing her mental distress. The Diamonds have to deal with the death of Pink Diamond, leading each of them to wallow in sadness, destroy out of fury, or isolate themselves, sticking them in an echo chamber where she just has to be perfect. Steven has the legacy of Rose Quartz to live up to. Heck, the legacy of Pink Diamond to deal with, and struggles with finding out who she truly was and how this perspective shifts, to the point where he doesn't even really recognize himself, or knows what he wants. The corrupted gems, and hell, even the cluster, are also dealing with the trauma. The corrupted gems with, well, corruption, and the cluster with the fact that it even exists in the first place, and it doesn't have a sense of identity with itself. And most relevant to this conversation, Bismuth, after being brought back from the bubble after thousands of years, has to deal with her comrades dying, and believes that it's her responsibility to avenge them with the breaking point, no matter how much it goes against the ideals of being a crystal gem.
Bismuth is an episode of a children's cartoon where a genocide, similar to the ones happening in the current year, is evoked for drama, and the suggested solution is to dismiss direct action and present no alternative. To connect this moral dilemma back to a previous dynamic, Bismuth is Lord Hater, and Steven is Wander. And exactly like in his own show, Wander is wrong here. And yet, that doesn't prevent Steven Universe from tying itself into moral and philosophical knots in an attempt to prove itself right.
Editor's note here. but there's just something here that I couldn't wait to talk about. Plus, the next half of a minute of the video gives me so much more to talk about that I might as well interject here and say that this is an absolutely scummy move. He brings up Wander over Yonder and compares it to Steven Universe by saying that it doesn't try to prove the viewpoint right, absolutely ignoring the finale of Wander over Yonder. You know, the one where Wander justifies the redemption of Lord Dominator and offers her a place with everyone else. The one that acknowledges genocide but ultimately ends it with, it'll be awkward but redemption is possible. Let me put that into context. He researched Steven Universe, at least the first 2.5 seasons, and even studied real-life genocide, but conveniently forgets to put the finale of Wander over Yonder. He applied such a high standard to Bismuth and how it showcases genocide for being a kid's cartoon, but doesn't do so for Wander over Yonder, yet says that Wander executes it better? If you want to talk about Steven Universe tying itself in moral and philosophical knots by using the final episode as the only example, then you should do the same for Wander and its final character interaction between the titular character and Lord Dominator.
To call Bismuth an ideological cop-out of an episode would be a massive understatement. It is the first warning sign of a disturbing downward spiral in Steven Universe's politics. Fast forward to the end of Season 5, where the Diamond Authority is now cohabitating with the same rebel gems they were once eradicating en masse. While there hasn't been a single line of dialogue indicating whether or not they will stop colonizing other worlds, they will apparently suffer no repercussions for their actions beyond feeling a bit foolish.
Oh boy! Now this'll be a lot to talk about. First off, I'm glad to see that you skipped 2.5 seasons worth of episodes. That shows that Steven, being the titular role, isn't necessarily the moral center. Second, while I promised myself that I'd only cover Bismuth related stuff, I have to make a small exception here, at least for a little bit, because this is usually where the argument is spawned that, thanks to the story of Steven Universe, the logical solution and the thematic solution to the conflict of the show is at odds with one another, in such a way that logically the diamond should have been shattered, and thematically it only makes sense to forgive them. In other words, Bismuth was right all along if we were going by logic, and the diamonds have been redeemed, or forgiven. I have to talk about the diamonds here, in order to talk about the episode Bismuth in the context of the rest of the show. But there are a few things to consider with this conclusion. First off, all of this blatantly ignores the fact that the gems indeed fight back when a gem is hostile towards them, whether it's Lapis, Jasper, Peridot, Malachite, Aquamarine, and Topaz, and even most of the corrupted gems. They do it so that they can be subdued and deal with them later, or give them a chance to change their ways. It's just that it doesn't end up working sometimes, most notably Lapis, and in those circumstances, that's when Steven has to resort to talking to his enemies with emotion in mind. This is why Bismuth is such a change for the show in terms of its formula, by the way. Despite how much this would typically warrant a fight, Steven doesn't, because Bismuth is a crystal gem, one that the other gems trusted and cared about, but the fact that he's forced to violence with a gem like Bismuth gives him a lot of guilt, despite how accidental it was, and how warranted it is for him to not deal with someone trying to murder him. Reunited shares in the former's ideologies logically, as all the gems tried to fight Blue, but can only knock her down. Then Yellow shows up and Blue is relatively unharmed, immediately proofing Peridot. And now, since there's no way to win, Steven tries his best to talk to the Diamonds to convince them not to fight, which fails when Yellow stomps him. Afterwards, he does so via an emotional plane where he can see the emotions of the character nearby, in which his only solution, his silver bullet, is to talk to them by using his powers. So logically, shattering them wouldn't have even been an option to consider, because of how suddenly they appear and how powerful they are. Second off, the episode immediately after that one showcases a very crucial reason as to why they couldn't be shattered, that being the healing of the corrupted gems. It's an easy and correct argument to say that Steven's convictions are laid out plainly for everyone to hear.
You did this, so you have to do something.
Now, this isn't only just stated as one of the main themes of the show, one that's focused on repeatedly, but it's the repercussion for their actions, fixing what they did and stopping their continued genocide, as again described in Familiar. Finally, saying that they feel foolish isn't as simple as being the only thing that happened at the end of the show. While we discuss the consequences that they face, there is something to remember. The Diamond's powers are indeed based on emotion. We see this when Steven gets new powers, Blue's sorrow, Yellow's anger, and White's idea of perfection via assimilation, that I will get into in a bit. The point of it is to change their mind and to realize why what they did was wrong, hence the name of their arc, and the song at the end where Steven says that while it's cool that they like Steven, they can truly get to know him by changing their mind. And I know that with this, there's the counter-argument that convincing the Diamonds that they're wrong is incredibly simplistic and doesn't apply. They don't deserve it as a result of their genocide. But here's the thing, the Fire Lord knew that there were other nations out there with different philosophies at work, but despite that, wanted to burn burn it all to the ground for the sake of ultimate power among the world. Lord Dominator knows that kindness is a thing that exists and works, but believes that it's lame and stupid and instead opts to destroy everything because it gives her joy. They were both meant to be human with their wants and desires. In the case of the diamonds, they don't have any other train of thought because nothing else to their knowledge has worked. They literally cannot handle the concept of it. There is no opposing argument to their form of life to them. If there is one, they're called defective, end of story, because gems are meant to fulfill important roles, and not doing these roles means that you fail your purpose. While this may seem like I'm infantilizing them, there are many gems with this singular role in mind, and or this simplistic worldview. Minorly, Pearl has to learn about stuff like what school is, or what movies are, and most gems, as Rose says, pop out of the ground knowing what their role is, but majorly, Peridot learns about this new way of life through her art. Lapis learns about the concept of change, prompting her to believe that she can do so. Jasper's entire identity hinges on fulfilling her role to her diamond, and if not, the Diamond Authority. Bismuth's entire backstory involved Rose specifically going to Bismuth and asking what she wanted, because the thought never occurred to her before. And the diamonds work similarly. Their primary mental frameworks within the show are to rule their colonies and expand the gem empire no matter what, and dealing with Pink/Rose and Pink/Rose's consequences. Conceptually, Rebecca Sugar designed the diamonds to be representation of the id, ego, and the superego, and they fill these roles very well. The id represents pure impulse and desire, which is why Pink initially wanted her own colony, but after changing her mind in regards to finding out what gem harvesting does, she tried to emotionally reach out to the other diamonds, and when it failed, she preyed on their emotions by becoming Rose Quartz and pretending to be Shattered, effectively dealing with Pink, by making Rose's cause, and or Pink Diamonds' cause, something that should be taken seriously, dealing with the consequences of her actions by continuing to fight for the Earth. The ego is meant to mediate the id through action or emotion. Blue and Yellow fit into their place and never questioned if this was the right thing to do. Blue tried to deal with Pink and mediate her desires with the human zoo, or with her desires compared to White's, but ended up failing to address her needs, and after Rose Quartz shattered Pink Diamond, she teamed up with the others for the Corruption Blast, dealing with the remnants of the traitors living on Earth, but afterwards can't help but succumb to emotion, stagnating in sadness as a result of Pink's death. Yellow fits into her place so well that she becomes incredibly upset with the entitlement that Pink gets, and as we see in Jungle Moon, mediates with Pink's feelings of inadequacy by sternly telling her to live up to her expectations, and to not abandon the colony she begged for. She also contributed to the Corruption Blast, but in order to keep her framework of efficiency, she believes she must destroy the failure of a colony known as Earth, with the introduction of the Cluster, by destroying everything that Rose fought to defend. The superego is a moral judgment that aspires to be perfection. How was White perfect? By fulfilling her role, knowing that Pink would come back crawling after playing around, so she can do the same for hers. Because to say that Pink ran away and never came back would be an admittance that she was imperfect, and that can't possibly be true. After all, White is perfect. Any other viewpoint is inherently imperfect, and therefore too flawed for White to acknowledge. So everyone must be thinking like White if they truly want to fulfill their roles as a perfect society, and any sort of repression is justified, as they're just hiding the imperfections that they have. With Change Your Mind, all of these get flipped on their heads, by acknowledging that their framework isn't perfect, bringing up how Blue and Yellow hurt the ones that they love for the sake of their framework to work, something that shouldn't be tolerated, something that shows that it wasn't perfect, and by existing and not just being Pink Diamond, Steven turns White Diamond's perfection on its head, by making her feel imperfect emotions, and as a result of it, she has no idea what to do, and that's when Steven presents the alternative, a system that dismantled everything making them miserable, from the expectations of growing gem life and getting rid of anything that didn't fit, to dealing with what Pink did and the consequences of their actions. It's why they spent the rest of their series meticulously fixing what they've done, traveling the galaxies, dismantling their empires, and restoring gem life that they've shattered, because their frameworks have been expanded, realizing how much they've hurt and invalidated so many in their lives. With the entirety of the narrative of Steven Universe in place, the episode gives us the two true conflicting ideologies of Steven and Bismuth, and it wasn't about killing the diamonds versus not killing the diamonds, but restorative justice versus punitive justice. There has been no point in the series where Steven says that the diamonds should be forgiven or don't deserve punishment, but what he does say is that they should pay for their crimes. Bismuth believes that there is nothing else to be done but kill the gems behind this, and if we were looking at this as uncharitably as possible, it would be the diamonds. So all of this is to say no, Bismuth wasn't right either logically or thematically, the diamonds didn't get away scot-free for their actions, and it was beyond feeling a little foolish.
What What's more, Steven had no idea that he could pull the "I'm one of you" card out of his back pocket when he told Bismuth to not even entertain the idea of shattering the diamonds. But the universe still conspired to make him morally right via a non sequitur. Good for him, I guess.
I could bring up Steven's naive perspective for this one, but I feel like there's another reason as to why Bismuth was wrong I could bring up here. It's almost like the show perfectly established why shattering a diamond wouldn't solve anything, which made Steven correct knowing what we know now. So tell me, what happened as a result of Pink Diamond shattering? Well, nothing much, just the corruption blast, forced shard fusion, and the cluster. We saw gems seeking revenge like Jasper and even fellow diamonds, and holding such a severe grudge against Rose Quartz, and by extension the Earth, that they literally go to Earth to finish the job. You know, nothing much at all.
Genocide Themes and Steven Universe are essentially filler content, backstory material worth including for dramatic flair, but not intricately unpacked enough to constitute meaningful commentary. It is simply a fact of the setting, entirely detached from the substance of Steven Universe's emotional core. Genocide in universe and out is active, malicious, and definitely still going on off-screen, but the show does not care.
Like I said before, assuming that you mean the Gem War in terms of genocide or even genocide of the life on Earth, there's the fact that Steven Universe takes place thousands of years after the genocide, while shows like Avatar or Yonder cover it currently happening. This explains a lot as to why the themes and stories that the shows tell are different, as they both provide meaningful commentary to each of their worlds' issues. It doesn't make Steven Universe bad for not deliberately going into depth about how bad genocide was, the same way that we don't necessarily need to enjoy the full stories of Avatar or Yonder by deliberately going into how they dealt with the effects of genocide years after the fact. Would it be cool? Sure. But if the story doesn't focus on it or cover meaningful commentary on it, it's not ineptitude. It's just not the focus of the story, which is absolutely fine. To bring up a more recent example, The Owl House has an episode in which Luz confronts her mom about abandoning her mom's plan and going to the realm of wizards instead. When they don't have enough time left, Luz promises that she'll stay home despite her own wishes. In doing so, I thought to myself, man, it would be neat to see how their conflicting views clash with one another. Do you tell a parent about a part of yourself that you have to keep hidden, but is important for them to know, especially with their opposing viewpoints? But later, we learned that Luz's mom has always been on her side, and it was more society that was pushing her to do those things. Was I disappointed? A bit, but then I realized that the point of her character was about that the whole time. About accepting Luz no matter what the world says, and being there for each other. Heck, you could say the same thing about shows like Naruto or My Hero Academia, the former starting with the idea that Naruto is a ninja that's forced to use hard work to overpower natural gifts, and the latter starting with the idea that despite having no quirk, Izuku could be a hero. They both get subverted later down the line by gaining powers, either through unlocking the beast within their stomach, or by just being given a quirk. And while a series about both a ninja who works hard to overpower gifts and the quirkless hero would have been interesting, it's not what the point of the show truly was. The point of Naruto, the show and the character, is that Naruto thinks outside the box. Conventional, traditional learning doesn't cut it for him, and he has to adapt to a world where it's the norm. And this applies to a lot of the characters. That's why his most common catchphrase talks about his ninja way. And the point of Izuku's character is that he has the power to surpass the expectations of All Might, but now he has to live up to them, despite lacking years of training that his classmates have, and trying to catch up, despite breaking his bones at every possible opportunity at first. And even when he masters getting a fraction of his power, it's just that, a fraction. Kraftsdwarf explains this very well when he looks back at his fairy tale retrospective.
Mountains were made out of molehills, though more often than not, just made up. The point of the story well and far away ignored to force it to be something it's not. I may like it less, but that shouldn't limit my ability to meet fairy tale on its own terms, and examine all of what it's doing without asking it to do something else that it's not, when the pieces there are already in service of something meaningful.
She is still someone who needs to be stopped through the use of justified violence, and though she survives the destruction of her ship, she is not handed a place among the same population she terrorized and displaced.
Except for the fact that when everything was said and done, Yonder was gonna give it to her at the end of the show.
It's never too late for a fresh start. So, let's try this again. Hello to you! Folks call me Wonder. That's my pal Sylvia. Welcome to the galaxy. We hope you'll accept our humble gift of friendship.
Yeah, I'm done here too. He ends the video off by saying we should praise Wander over Yonder for how it tackles genocide, and then asks about donating to UNICEF. I guess I'll say that while this video is exhausting, I don't think it's coming from a place of hating Steven Universe. I think that Dire Gentleman sees the show in the same way that a lot of people do, that it's a show that has flaws, but still has a lot of good stuff. It's just that this take of genocide that he got from the show is one of the perceived flaws of the show. I was definitely drained by this video, but I think his heart is overall in the right place. So, I've given my opinions on both Lily and Dire Gentleman. I said that they were either bad or alright, but this might go on for a bit more. Just Stop is one of my favorite content creators. There are so many videos of his that I love, because he puts so much effort into making each of them have a compelling viewpoint and great writing. Originally, I was just gonna delete my first ER video, but after seeing his re-review of the Middle School Worst Years of My Life movie, it gave me the inspiration to redo it over and cover what I didn't before. Other favorites of mine include his Big Nate video, his Nicktoon and Disney sequel videos, his Santa Inc. video, and heck, even if I don't agree with a lot of it, I loved his High Guardian Spice video, which is why it pains me to go over this video, which, funny enough, served as another form of inspiration, I guess. By his own admission, this will be the only Steven Universe video that he makes, because, I'll be frank, it doesn't seem like he cares about this material, which is fine by me. Not everyone has the same interests, and I love it when he talks about the stuff that he's passionate about. So with no offense to him, let's get into it. I will say that the intro is probably the best summary I've seen of Steven Universe up to this point, so like, kudos to that.
However, Steven isn't on board with this, and in his exact words, he asks Bismuth, "Shattering gems, wouldn't that make us the same as Homeworld?" And I want to plainly say without a shadow of a doubt, no. And while the episode may say the answer is yes, I don't think that's the case at all.
Point 1. The episode never said any explicit moral on whether or not Shattering makes them the same as Homeworld. To reiterate, what happened was a clash between two different perspectives, that being avenging the fallen gems by killing the diamonds, and displaying naive optimism to try and help everyone just like his mom taught him. At least that's what it was at first, but then Bismuth viewed Steven as Rose and this conversation was dropped, as neither side was going to be convinced by either Rose Quartz or by Shattering gems.
But to get to the core of why it doesn't work, I need to explain the trope the writers are utilizing, that being, as I like to call it, the argument from goodness trope. Let me set a scene for you. Protagonist Jones has defeated the big bad of the story and is one blow or drop or whatever away from killing him. But what's that? Side character A shouts aloud, "No, Protagonist-kun, don't do it! If you do it, you'll be just like him!" The just like him part being in reference to the act of killing out of a need for revenge, making it morally on the same level as killing or whatever the antagonist did, and turning the protagonist into what they despise, a villain. That's not the only context this situation is used in, but for sure it's the most prominent, and that's clearly what Steven Universe is going for with this portrayal of Bismuth.
I want you to keep this argument from goodness trope in mind for later, but I will say that this trope does have a name on TV tropes called, "If you kill him, you will be just like him."
She's so swept up in the emotions of the moment that she doesn't realize what her killing the diamonds would imply, and Steven wants to stop her from doing it. Yet the scene, when taken into context, doesn't work at all.
Well, it does depend on the context that you're talking about, but I'm gonna deal with the fact that Just Stop immediately goes into the diamonds being the ones that are shattered. While it would usually be fine and or understandable, the problem is that he forgets about the Shattering Gems line for the rest of the video and brings up no other lines from the conversation. So to reiterate point 2, if this conversation is with the context of Shattering Gems, then this involves determining which ones are worthy, which is unsustainable with the Bismuth kill first and ask questions later strategy fundamentally different from Rose, who took the time to emotionally connect with gems, including Bismuth herself, asking what they want to do, and Steven, who sees all gems as friends who just need some help and understanding.
Rather than out of a basic mentality like, "You'll be the same as him," Hawkeye as well as main character Edward Elric and former antagonist Scar all posit that if Mustang kills Envy for the sake of vengeance instead of duty, that final blow will make it impossible for him to remain a person ruled by reason instead of hate, and if he wants to take over the country as its new leader, he can't be that way. They aren't saying Envy shouldn't die because they all know he has to, but if that's going to happen, it can't be Mustang that delivers the final blow. It's an idea grounded in logic, character, and Hawkeye's mixed feelings of love and respect for Mustang as a person, not wanting him to fall down a path he can never return from. Batman has had the chance to kill the Joker on multiple occasions, and there are plenty who would say it's the best option to stop him from breaking out of Arkham again, but he doesn't do it for a simple reason. Killing the Joker would mean he'd won. That all Batman stood and fought for was meaningless. His symbol would be tainted, meaning he could never go back.
Alright, we'll get back into logic in a bit, but I will concede. Batman's symbol being tainted would be a big problem for him, especially when he lives by the code set by the symbol. Quick question though, wouldn't the same apply to Steven's symbol as a crystal gem at the time of Bismuth, hence why he says,
"It's not what a crystal gem would do."
Whether they're a diamond or not, like point 3 states, defeating gems and keeping them in bubbles is part of his code, because the crystal gems will be able to eventually take care of them, unlike Shattering, where that possibility is dead, like he says in the episode. Similarly to how Batman keeps sending criminals to Arkham Asylum instead of killing them. That's the logic behind this, that's where the character is in regards to Steven's beliefs, and that's where his love/respect for Bismuth is, because Steven, and by extension the Crystal Gems, believe in her to uphold the values of a Crystal Gem, and they want to make sure that she maintains that path.
Aang doesn't want to kill Ozai, and that's rooted in his belief as a nomad, strongly opposing violence of any kind, and in particular the act of murder, which becomes a major conflict of his character as the day gets closer. In a way, it's sort of similar to Steven's case, coming from a place of moral opposition, but while Steven's is solely based on the most basic ideas of what makes good and evil, Aang's is much more complex. He learns about how his people and all he knew were obliterated by the Fire Nation, he sees how they've subjugated and enslaved those that would fight against them, and he knows what Ozai is willing to do to get what he wants, even if it's scarring his only son and banishing him from the land to look for the Avatar. But Aang's beliefs hold strong, and he can't find it in himself to kill Ozai, no matter how much of a bitch he is. The difference between Aang and Steven is that he does believe deep down that Ozai may need to be killed to stop the tyranny, but it conflicts with his own personal personal conviction, and to him, no matter how right that statement might be for everyone else, he wants to find a way around it.
Alright, so here we can bring up point 4, about how Steven's naive optimism is the point of his character before Bismuth, and the episode is where his perspective changes, especially on the show's end, but I want to keep this explanation in mind for later. For now though, this description way undersells Steven, who believes in basic good or evil, as he learns revelations similarly to how Aang does. While it was originally basic good and evil, his optimism and willingness to help gems becomes more complex, like learning how gems were kept enslaved in items for recreational use, how corrupted gems were once just regular gems like the crystal gems, how gems drained resources from the earth for their own needs, how Pearl was a servant on Homeworld, how Garnet was going to be shattered on Homeworld, and so on and so forth, furthering his stance on what it means to be a crystal gem. Not to mention, similarly to Aang, they will both fight for what they believe in with a strong conviction. It's just that he's never had to think beyond it despite learning all that he has. He never thinks something along the lines of, what if we wanted to help gems doesn't work, because it always has. Hence why Peridot was able to trick him in message received. Bismuth as an episode works similarly to how Aang's perspective starts to be questioned after Katara in the rain, when the prospect appears. Something that they've never had to put much thought of before, but is inevitable nevertheless. Despite all of this though, there's one last thing to say. This is where arguing about Steven Universe not following the trope of argument from goodness falls on its face. There's the fact that for both Roy and Aang, these were both done at the end of their series, as opposed to Steven, to which Bismuth happens smack dab in the middle. But more to the point, the goodness wasn't just poofed out of nowhere, nor is it necessarily indicative of the show's messages just because this trope is present. It was explained from Hawkeye's perspective in Fullmetal Alchemist, from Aang's perspective in Avatar, and this one is from Steven's perspective, no matter how flawed their perspectives may be. Like, you know who else uses this trope? JoJo Part 4, when Angelo, a convicted murderer, and the one who killed Josuke's grandfather, tries to escape death. And I don't think that this was meant to be a serious trope usage, to display a message from the creator from the perspective of Angelo. Okay, that may be weird since it's the villain, and it may be hard to see my point. Instead, how about the original Dragon Ball, where Goku stops Krillin from killing Vegeta because he wants to fight him another day. Goku may be the protagonist, and the trope may be present, but I don't think it's indicative of a moral that the show is trying to teach.
And in the moment, it displays another clear difference to Steven Universe. While Aang is able to get rid of the powers of the Fire Lord, a physical trait that can be taken away and therefore stop his tyranny, it's impossible to take down the diamonds and their fleets without killing them. This isn't how Steven Universe goes, and again, that only adds to how badly they implemented the trope.
I feel like it's important to note that the powers of the diamonds are emotion-based, aka they're empaths, so changing their mind could very much lead to taking away their powers, specifically by showing how they don't affect him in the ways that they thought, thanks to his human half. Like how he ended up winning the day in both Reunited by showing the diamonds who he truly was, and in Change Your Mind, showing that his powers belong to him, exposing an imperfection in White Diamond's thinking. Also, it's important to remember that Aang stopping Ozai isn't the only thing that stops the Fire Lord's tyranny. Sure, it was a big part, but it wasn't the only thing, because if that's all that it was, then the Fire Nation soldiers would have still fought for the sake of Ozai and burned Ba Sing Se, if it wasn't for the White Lotus and the airship slice. And Azula would have taken over as Fire Lord if it wasn't for the Agni Kai and Katara. Surprisingly, by taking care of it now, the show preemptively solves the problems that are caused in Steven Universe, like the loyalty of Homeworld gems like with Jasper, and the need to execute orders for the sake of the diamonds like with Peridot. It doesn't help all of it, but we'll get to it when we get to it.
But to close up on Avatar, Aang's action is again a culmination of all the series stands for: balance, idealism, and the idea that not all situations are as cut and dry as they seem. The latter two being attempted by Steven Universe and falling flat in their execution of the moral argument between Steven and Bismuth. To put it bluntly, the trope of argument from goodness isn't applicable from the broad scale of that would make you just like them when the antagonist is too terrible for that to work. The diamonds aren't one-off murderers or ignorant of their own actions or a byproduct of some oppressive system. They are the oppressive system.
Oh, you mean like Envy and Ozai? Neither of them are just one-off murderers nor ignorant of their actions, and they're definitely too terrible for it to work. And this is even considering the different viewpoints of the trope, with the spiral of madness or the resolve being showcased compared to Steven Universe. Envy literally started the Ishvalan War, and takes immense pleasure in starting said war for the violence that it causes for humanity. Yeah, I'm kinda surprised that you forgot that fact. Ozai had Zuko explain to him point by point why he's wrong, but refuses to trust him for the sake of glory to the Fire Nation. Plus, he was the Fire Lord, the literal ruler of the oppressive system. Are you kidding me? This is the problem that I have with this part of the video, and it's him arguing that the trope doesn't work with Steven Universe, while simultaneously proving why his own tropes that he came up with don't work for the shows that he brought up. It's a scenario of having his cake and eating it too, as he argues this while maintaining the belief that they still work.
They've conquered countless worlds, killed no doubt billions, possibly trillions of intelligent life forms they considered inferior. They've built fascistic regimes enforcing a strict hierarchy determining how gems will function, and if they don't stay in line, they'll be shattered. They command fear and dominance against anyone that opposes them. Overall, not exactly the most easily redeemable people.
Again, it's important to recognize that this is in the context of the Gem War, as seen with the episode itself. But, more to the point, if they don't stand in line, they'd be shattered. Gee, it's almost like he says that in this exact fight that nobody should be shattering gems, period. Spoiler alert, that includes the diamonds. It's kinda like Steven's naively built perspective had a bit of truth to it after all. Finally, at this point in time, Steven says nothing about redemption. All he said is that shattering gems are wrong and that nobody deserves it. It makes a lot more sense a bit later, but bringing it up now seems like a deliberate misinterpretation of the episode on the level of that Twitter meme where they come up with a whole new sentence.
As stated, their powers aren't external like Ozai, they're figurative as well as physical. The power they hold in the armies they control is far greater than any ability they might be able to harness, so finding a way to take their abilities isn't going to help.
Is this the part where I bring up how their abilities are tied to their emotions, and by having Steven tear down these misconceptions, their abilities have also been torn down, and then thanks to those previous misconceptions being torn down, their society where all the gems worship them for their dictatorship is also taken down? Or is this where I bring up the graphic novel of Avatar that shows that Aang taking the powers didn't fully help either? For instance, the new Ozai society who thought Zuko was weak. Maybe the first one is better because the second one doesn't seem like too strong of an argument for someone talking about the show exclusively. But I will bring up again that these can apply to both Avatar and Full Metal Alchemist, considering how much power each of their organizations had behind the scenes, which is why each of their respective final battles involve taking all of them out, whether it's a full-on attack or an airship slice / Azula chaining.
If Steven wants to stop their reign, he and the gems need to shatter them. Only then will the power they hold be able to disperse.
Oh yeah, like how that totally happened when Pink Diamond was shattered and I don't know, corruption, the cluster, and gems like Jasper heading out for revenge.
Only then will the brainwashed masses of their capital listen to reason.
Yeah, quick question on that. How are the crystal gems made in the first place? Because I could bring up Bismuth and how she was asked by Rose what she wanted to do, leading her to join, despite the fact that she was still part of the brainwashed masses.
It's hilarious that Steven would ever humor the idea that killing the diamonds would put Steven and co on the same level as them. No, not just funny, it's absolutely moronic. Wouldn't it make us just as bad? Well, tell me, Steven, how many planets have you genocided? Because unless it's in the quadruple digits, I don't think it's all too comparable when thinking about the good killing the diamonds could do.
Well, he doesn't go into too much depth here, but if I had 2 nickels for misunderstanding the meaning of genocide and how it pertains to Steven Universe... Wait, I did this joke already. If I had 2 nickels for how many 2 nickels jokes I've made, I'd have 2 nickels, which...
Have you forced your disobedient subjects' corpses to merge their shattered souls together in some giant abomination of a being enraptured in total suffering for thousands of years? Better yet, have you been implied to have done that more than once? Because if so, I might need to question your status as the main character or any kind of moral authority. But no, Steven is right because he is the main character, and that's the message the writers want to go for, no matter how much it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
It's almost like him being the main character doesn't necessarily mean that he's always 100% right, and that this is where Steven Universe begins developing more as a character, after realizing that despite his ideals, not only does it not work a lot of the time, but it conflicts with his idea of who a crystal gem is, by revealing in the arc that Rose shattered Pink Diamond, i.e. point 4.
And dear God, they try to make Bismuth more in the wrong by portraying her as angry and aggressive, but after all she's gone through, I'm not sure any less would be expected. Like, how's Steven gonna fix this? Fucking talk to the genocidal sadistic maniacs and get them to say sorry? That's exactly what they did.
Okay, I guess we're at point 6, the misunderstanding of the diamonds, where we ignore the fact that the crystal gems did indeed try fighting the diamonds but didn't even get close. They bring up the fact that they would all be able to save the corrupted gems if the diamonds worked together, and that because their minds are focused on primary frameworks, think of it like the homunculi from Full Metal Alchemist changing their minds, comparing someone like sloth or gluttony to greed, not just saying sorry but Steven showing them how their system doesn't work for themselves, helps by finding a system that does work. Because given the context of the show, simplifying the themes of the episode, or heck, the entire show, to killing the diamonds versus not killing the diamonds, doesn't tell the true length of it all.
After cornering themselves with a message of shattering the diamonds isn't the answer bullshit, the only other option the writers of Steven Universe could come up with to solve their issue was by talking it out and telling the Space Gestapo it's okay to have flaws.
The healing of the corrupted gems have been a recurring plot thread for the entire show, and dropping it would be like if the gang just left after taking away the bending of Ozai.
This is the problem with setting up a clear image of characters and not having the foresight to create a satisfactory conclusion. Like, imagine if Aang decided his best course of action was to talk to the Fire Lord instead of killing him or taking away his bending.
Actually, considering that it was Steven's power that actually defeated the diamonds, you know, being an empath and all of that, and also by the proof of his existence breaking White Diamond, it would be like if Aang wanted to employ his principles and was able to do so by using a power given to him thanks to how he was born, stopping the tyranny of the system in a way that, while there's a bit of violence involved, ended with upholding Aang's principles, and succeeding with the terror of the officials being stopped in a way that wasn't thought possible. Wait, that's exactly what happened to both Aang and Steven. Awkward.
Steven Universe wanted to be the last airbender. It wanted to share this idea that violence didn't have to be the answer, but it had none of the build-up. Steven's moral conviction was impersonal and weakly based.
I'm sorry, what? I get that from your perspective, Aang is relatively more based by considering that Ozai may have to die, but ignoring the fact that this oversimplifies Steven yet again. It doesn't matter if your moral conviction is based in your traditional practices, or if you just don't want to do it because they are equally as based and equally as valid. Especially when you call them impersonal, not being influenced by, showing, or involving personal feelings. This is just flat out wrong no matter what perspective you take. Steven's empathy is his biggest character strength, and his biggest flaw, as I've explained several times. And that's not even taking into consideration the entire end of the 5th season, learning how he's related to the diamonds and utilizing his personal feelings and lessons based on empathy that he's learned throughout the series to get through to them.
The death of the diamonds wouldn't be the mark of any significant change for his character, considering he knows jack shit about them other than their atrocities.
You know, except for the irreversibility, his ideals as a true crystal gem, and the fact that the corrupted gems need to be saved thanks to diamond powers, being that there wasn't much of another option. Also, something apply this to Aang. You know what? No. Let's assume that Steven's moral conviction was weakly based, only focused on the basics of what's good and what's evil, and assuming that they can't take back what they've done, and there's no corruption that could be cured. Like, let's say, Wander from Wander Over Yonder. Someone who, even knowing every bad thing that Lord Dominator does, destroying every bit of the galaxy, still wants to be her friend and forgive her, as has worked out for him mostly every time. The death of Lord Dominator, and therefore the death of that chance of turnaround, would without a question change his character.
There's nothing significant to give the audience an impression that his decision made sense in any context beyond the vague idea the writers belly flopped on so hard it broke the fucking sound barrier. In a way, at one point after figuring out Rose is one of the diamonds, they try to begrudgingly backpedal by bringing Bismuth back and saying, hey, there's a reason my mom's plan didn't make sense. But Steven, you had the same idea without the excuse. Where's your reason for being an idiot, huh?
And we end off with point 4 again. Epic. You know, unlike Dire Gentleman, I don't know how to feel about this video. He makes it clear that he's covering it because it's popular, like he did with Rick and Morty. He also states that it's his only video about Steven Universe that he's doing, which is also understandable. Maybe he just doesn't care about the series overall, but believes that Bismuth is worth talking about. At the same time though, it doesn't add anything new to the conversation like Dire Gentleman did in his talk about genocide, or when Lily brought it up in context of what it means to the actual show. And I'll admit that there's nothing wrong with looking at what you have there and coming to a conclusion. In fact, it was quite refreshing to not tie it into a bigger point beyond what you just said. But when everyone has made the same conclusions you have about it, then maybe look into it a bit more, or look into some more counter-arguments to see if this view is warranted. He does this once, and it's with the easy peasy logic of murdering people you disagree with. But I feel like Just Stop knows that just because an opinion is popular, it doesn't mean that that's all there is to it. He displays this well in his review of the Boys comic and his fairy tale video, heck, even Santa Inc., but fails to do so with Steven Universe, and it's just kinda disappointing. I feel like given source material that he cares about or finds more interesting, he could do better. So I guess I'm just depressed that this video exists, but still optimistic for his next passion project. So, that was exhausting, and I'm pretty sure all of you could tell. What started out as just covering what happens in the episode itself spread to so many different places. The first 4 points were the only ones I thought that I really needed, but it spread to themes about genocide and even to the very end of the show with the diamonds and arguing about them in terrible faith. Even for points where I had to admit that they were vague and unclear, it took it in the least charitable way possible to make it perceived worse than it was initially. I can understand why it caused so much ire at the time of its release, even if it was slightly misguided, but the fact that these people had the context of the entire show and did jack shit with it until the diamonds was infuriating. With all that said and done though, this is what I really like about the episode, by itself or with the context of anything else. The initial clash of perspectives is very cool to see, and it's a nice change of perspective from the show before that, especially with the fact that they're both crystal gems, as opposed to Steven's other foes that are usually just homeworld gems. The fact that neither of these struggles are revealed as the right one but are brought up to have people think about it, with them both being right and wrong in different cases, is very clever, and I love the greatest in the morality. I love the fact that it incorporates everything that Steven has learned before, by determining which gems would benefit from change or learning a different viewpoint, associating the viewpoint of Rose Quartz, while presenting a flaw in this part that Bismuth can focus on with the death of fellow gems. I like the fact that the episode sets up that the conflict is about stuff that's unfixable, as the code of the crystal gems, since episode 1 is to save those that need help. It also does so by showing Bismuth learning about the gems shattered and focusing on that aspect. I like how, after this episode, the reasoning turns into another reason later on that gradually shows how both Bismuth and Steven were wrong in different ways, with Bismuth not factoring in the reaction of the shattered diamonds to other diamonds, and Steven to the fact that his principles could not be maintained by the person who he aspires to be, Rose Quartz. It brings nuance to the episode, and the rest of Steven's arc for the rest of the original series, and it was a great shift for his character overall, as he learns about how some gems can't, or don't, want to be helped despite this optimism. I like the fact that this episode is consistent with all the themes of the show, by showing how the Gem War introduced trauma to the Crystal Gems. Even someone like Bismuth, who we get the reaction of immediately after the Gem War is done, relatively speaking, and them being on the same side, that being of anti-genocide, with different reactions becoming incredibly understandable. Despite everything, including the fact that Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond, the rest of the series indeed shows why Bismuth's viewpoint is wrong despite that fact, while doing the same for Steven's view, and in doing so, they could try to take the diamonds out with fighting, and not killing for the sake of saving corrupted gems, and when everything is said and done, and Bismuth takes everything in, she delivers an amazing line about talking to the diamonds at their level, how he's the one that's gotta do it to save gem kind. In any case, this was indeed a hard video to make, because on paper, a lot of their points seem valid, and reasonable, more so than the topics that I've covered before. Knowing and explaining the context of everything before Bismuth, the episode itself, and for some reason the end of the series, seems to help in their cases. Heck, it got to the point where when making this video, I thought to myself, am I just wrong about this? This especially rang true, since, unlike the Lapis video, there's no disagreement with this notion. This is the common conception, and I guess despite everyone saying that, I stuck to my principles with this. I don't think it'll topple anything down like Steven or Aang's style, because not only is my channel very low when it comes to subscribers and views, but Lily, Dire Gentleman, and Just Stop all have way bigger fan bases than me. But in times like this, I coincidentally listen to the one and only Bismuth song in the entire show, Who We Are. In this song, Steven is singing about how everything was ruined when Spinel injected the Earth and reset the Crystal Gems. After 2 years of restoring the damage done from the diamonds and not facing any life-threatening scenarios, everything possible has gone wrong for him, and he thinks that there's no way out. Bismuth reassures him through song that it's never been easy being a crystal gem.
When has it ever been easy? Hasn't it always been hard to be us?
As going against the grain leads to creating enemies.
When you go against the grain, there's always somebody around you can't trust.
And that in the end, they'll figure it out as crystal gems to help their friends first and foremost, no matter how long it takes.
Even if it takes 1,000 years to get them back, we will.
Bismuth will try to fight and do what's right with Steven and save the day. That's what it means to brandish a star. They'll find a way to save the day. That's who they are. Am I saving the day? No, but I acknowledge that going against popular consensus is hard. I mean, a lot of my channel now is about doing that same thing, and in doing so, I'll definitely make enemies, but I care about Steven Universe, and I don't like it when it gets misrepresented in the way that it has been for so long. A show that's always been a hot button topic for this or that reason, despite 9 out of 10 times, it's not deserving of it. The one where it seems like the only time that people talk about it is to specifically dunk about it, and I don't explicitly hate any of these content creators. Maybe Lily, but I haven't seen any of her recent content, so it's hard to say. I just dislike the points that they make, and if you've made it to the end of the video and understand at least where I'm coming from, then you really are better than them.